go. And we'll start off. What's going on, everybody? I'm Justin Thomas. Welcome to Top Shelf Fandom. I'm your host. This is the Storyteller series, episode 5, Denis Villeneuve. And I have with me John from Cortex Videos. Tell everybody where they can find you, John, and we will jump right into this one.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on, Justin, once again to talk, the storytellers and director series that you do. You can find me on Cortex Videos at all the social media platforms, including YouTube. I cover Dune, Denis Villeneuve's new film coming out this year. Also focus big on Tenet and some other TV shows. So if you're into that, come check me out. But yeah, thanks once again, Justin, for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to kind of have you to be my go-to on this because you joined me for the first episode, of course, which was the Nolan episode, which is our longest episode, and we're trying to refine the format, but Nolan is fascinating for many, many reasons, but especially this one because you are now you're not a film student, you're a graduate with a degree, and you have aspirations to be a director. You truly have a background to speak about this because now we're diving into not just screenwriters or authors. Denis is mostly known, at least in the broader spectrum, as a director. And I really want to use this episode to be the launching pad for like Spielberg and stuff like that, who's coming up, for how a director tells a story. Because a director, there's what is the old phrase, tell them what to say and where to put the camera. And that's what a director does. That's not really accurate. They do that. But Denis brings a lot to it. And how would you describe a director's role? And of course, it varies, but they're in it from the ground up.
Yeah, I think in comparison with the writer is traditionally working by themselves or with a small writer's room, essentially, of people, whereas the director has to really be an expert or pretend to be an expert in many different roles of the production, whether it's assisting with cinematography, production design, whether it's, the score, or even just laying out notes for the writers themselves. And you can clearly identify with Denis Villeneuve that he's a filmmaker which has had an input with essentially all of that. He puts his stamp, on the films he makes, and to consistently capture his visual storytelling style and how he evolves from film to film in a way that the picture still contains what a Villeneuve film would have. It calls for a high level of input across all these different roles, essentially.
Yeah, he definitely stands out. He has been compared to Nolan many times. I don't know how I feel exactly about that. I think a lot of times when people are standout artists, they get compared, and it's not really apples to apples. Like I see some similarities in the projects. We won't get into it, but I think he's fantastic, but he's fantastic in a different way. And ambiguity, he finds power in it. I know we're going to talk a lot about that. The way in which he just uses, the lighting in his films, the color, the oversaturation of color to get that pop of contrast when he
visual storyteller.
Yes.
Really do it perfectly.
My favorite Villeneuve project is Arrival, and it might be one of my favorite movies, and it's for many reasons because I'm intrigued by it because it was an adaptation from The Story of Your Life, which is basically a short story by Ted Chiang, and Eric Heiser, actually the screenwriter for this, had to convince Denis to do it. And Denis, they really had this process of going through, because that movie it's always that sci-fi trope, of aliens invading and all that. But when you look at Villeneuve's take on it, and we'll get deeper into it once we get there chronologically, but, it really is, it subverts a lot of expectations, but it does it in a way that is very exciting and I think beautiful storytelling, but also risky storytelling with the way in which he plots out how the story is going to be, the way in which he chooses to show us the story, meaning when you watch a Denis film, you don't usually know what's going on for most of it, but in a good way. It's always walking that thin line. Like I was speaking with a photographer yesterday, and they talked about breaking rules. Breaking rules is all fine and good. Like, he breaks the rules of thirds all the time, Denis does, but you need to establish, what the rules are first to break them and have it mean anything. Like, every film student can make that whacked out film student film that usually aren't very good, that, breaks all the rules, but you really got to know the rules and play by the book in order to subvert it. George R. R. Martin's a good example.
You've got to allow these you've got to allow these different roles to really, work their magic. Put trust in them. It's the collaboration and the trust to all these different people who are working on the film. And, a director has to really embrace all of that. He has to embrace not just what he wants for the film, what his vision is, but what everyone can bring, the collaborative process. And I think Villeneuve, like some of these people you've mentioned, he really stands apart and he does his own thing, but at the same time, as we say, can collaborate with them. So
yeah, you won't put people on tilt or put them, because you want to put people off balance in certain aspects of your story if they're never on balance. So if you don't establish a consistency in a norm, then there is no breaking of anything. So I always like to kind of hammer that down, because I think a lot of people just like to subvert tropes now that the Game of Thrones happened. Yeah, now that happened, everybody just wants to subvert everything.
Oh god.
In order to subvert, you've got to have the actual convention at first. But anyways, so Arrival is a beautiful film to me. It's a beautiful story, but we'll start with what was essentially, and I know a favorite of yours, it's Prisoners. And this was kind of his break into Hollywood, and his foray into American filmmaking, as I saw him put it in an interview. What did you think about this film overall?
Well, for me, it's, as you said, it's my favorite Villeneuve film. And I think, as you say, as he was breaking into the more bigger films, and he was coming off of the more artistic stuff, he was still able to capture that in this film. And the reason for it being my favorite film is because it really challenges the audience. It challenges them with its themes, its filmmaking, and mainly through Hugh Jackman's protagonist. It primarily deals with the hypocrisy of our own nature, however silent we prefer to remain towards torture and granting the illicit power to torture. Prisoners chooses to take this and wrap them up for the audience in a story that hits closer to home, is what I'm getting at. Really challenging us to recognize the convergence of our personal sentiments and, about protecting our loved ones, but then also our societal refusal to come to terms with what the government has done in the so-called war on terror. And that's where, Jake Gyllenhaal's character kind of gives the balance in that film. Really, it's a portrayal of a distressed father, sinking to the moral level of his daughter's kidnapper in order to recover what's most important to him. And this is a prime example of the multiple ways that strength and weakness can manifest within us, I find anyway. I just think it's a really powerful, moody, dull look at that, but really realistic as well. And it just goes straight into these big themes that, other directors would probably be hesitant over going into.
Absolutely. And I like what you said about strength, turning into weakness, because in a story like that, a common aspect of it, and you usually have this, it's usually done in procedurals where you have like your straight cop that, wants to get the bad guy, but how far do they go before they become the bad guy, and so forth. So it's when strength can become weakness, even in, physical, emotional, all that, but going too far, being too strong. But it can be a weakness because it's going against your moral code, not to get all moralistic on you, but it's, I kind of see like two different sides of him, like the philosophical side, but then there's the Sicario, the prisoner side, but as you said, there's a deeper emotional and philosophical side to those films as well. But would you agree that there seems to be kind of the Dune, Blade Runner, Arrival, Denny, and then you've got Enemy. Well, Enemy's a psychological thriller, but, Sicario and Prisoners, which embraces a whole kind of different style all around, right?
Yeah, I think with the filmmaking and story in these different types of films you mentioned, as I was saying to you before, the episode, he's very much a chameleon director. He goes from, like you say, the Prisoners and the Enemy side of things to the Arrival, and he goes into science fiction and what it means to be human and questioning that. But he still really covers that in Prisoners. He questions humanity and but yeah, I think the filmmaking is what stays the same, or at least improves, and he finds new ways of approaching it from film to film. He's very much a visual storyteller, as you were saying. And I think in Prisoners, when looking at the filmmaking and how he started that transition into these types of newer films, he really wanted to, in my opinion, convey a reflective sense of the story. For example, Villeneuve uses a darkened color palette to infuse the film with, a grim and earthy tone, which also helps to perfectly capture the Pennsylvanian, winter setting in the film. But it really overall just captures the mood and atmosphere of the narrative. And this is what he always does. He uses visuals, his visual filmmaking, not to just, make the film look good or because he thinks that's a good image to put on the screen, but it captures the mood of the narrative and the story that you're watching. And you got to give props to Roger Deakins with this film. The cinematography is.
Yeah, absolutely. What was Jason Schenkel, who's handling Spielberg? He had just messaged me, and him and his wife. They both are from the Nattercast. Great people. We're talking about how they've been rewatching all Spielberg's films in preparation for this, and that the tone, it changes from this movie to this movie. And I go, it's that exactly. With these directors, like you just brilliantly pointed out, it's about tone. It's not just say the words on the page. You have to know what emotion is behind that. But emotion, it's a visual medium. It needs to be visually conveyed, and that goes from everything from the lighting, to the way in which they choose to, angle where to put the camera, which I find, I brought this up to you earlier. I find that I never see like the personal perspective, like in Arrival, you'd think you'd for sure get a hazmat POV, like, like how clunky, because they make sure to show how awkward they are in those suits, like everybody. But you never get that. It's always like this omniscient view, right? Like it's always, I'm gonna have visuals with this. But it's very interesting to take that approach. I don't know if that's true for all of his films, but even in Blade Runner, and he plays with the ambiguity with the camera angles. I notice even when Kay is going into the first household, and I don't remember who he's retiring, but it's Batista, the guy that's playing him.
Yeah.
But Batista, you hear Kay speaking, or you see Batista, vice versa. Get what I mean? Like you don't see, like one's in the left hand corner of the screen and there's nobody else there. There's all this open space. So it's like, like that. I don't know. It's like that ambiguity.
It's weird because the landscape of his films always stand out to me more than, the few point of view shots we do get. It like you're saying, it's always the world around that, and what kind of world are they in right now, and why is whatever the narrative is, like for instance in Prisoners, the narrative of Hugh Jackman's kid and his friend's kid being abducted, that is the center focus, but then the landscape of the rain and the constant, the miserable nature to the film, it adds another layer to how you get into his mindset.
Yeah, and how you should feel about the area. In Arrival,
and the cinematography helps that, of course, like you're saying.
Absolutely. You see, and as you said, we always have to give credit to the cinematographer, which I believe they did win best cinematography for Prisoners. I think it did win an Academy Award, so I think he did win.
But yeah, I believe it did for that. I'm not too sure actually. I'd have to look that up.
But go ahead.
I was going to say, Roger Deakins with that film, he set a level of paranoia throughout the film for the audience and also the main character. And, the child abducter in the film is more a supernatural force than a mere being, the way he's presented, if you know what I'm saying. It's always, you can't quite put your finger on who it is and who, essentially why he would do something like that, or the character would do something like that. But then when you realize, as we come to the end of the film, the twist that's hiding in plain sight of the old widow who has kept them the entire film, it's a way of hypnotism. I can't even say the word, but like a hypnotizing nature that Villeneuve presents to the film. He kind of gets you sucked into who it would appear to be, but then completely shifts and goes, no, this is the person. But it makes sense. It's not just like, oh, here's a plot twist. It makes sense to what you're showing. It
serves the story. Yeah, and Deakins was nominated for that. And I see he also did No Country for Old Men, so I can definitely get that landscape. I can already, if that's anything like the landscape in Old Country, then, it's definitely something worth checking out. That's one I have not seen yet. When we're looking at these types of stories, because I want to move to Arrival, because like this is my gem. I love it because it's about it's like that existential crisis, but it's a story about how the, you know, because one of my favorite sayings is, and it's not really an adage or anything, but it's at the beginning of this audio book that I just got done with, The Science of Storytelling, and it's about the world is going to burn in the embers, right? You know, we're all going to die. Not only we all are going to die, but like eventually this whole world's going to be gone. And we tell each other stories
for today's time frame. This film is perfect for today.
But we tell stories, and stories are what get miners to go mine and, you know, do their job that's not too comfortable and get you through the grind. And then at the end of the day, you know, again, a little bit of existential crises here, but it means nothing really. But it's still we embrace, and we indulge, and we immerse ourselves in stories. And Arrival is really, when you're talking about that twist, because from the original novel or the short story, Villeneuve did change around with Eric Heiser the way in which that plot plays out, because you are aware the daughter is first off at an older age, dies in a rock climbing, spoiler alerts people, but in Arrival we're watching the whole time and we think we're getting flashbacks even though there's hints. And this is what you're talking about with Prisoners, about I have not seen the film obviously, but you said that it's not a twist for a twist's sake. You know, it works to convey the emotion and really tie you to the film. Same way with Arrival. In the book, you know right away, this is like, it's already kind of cited that she has obtained, you know, the language, thus the ability to kind of like, you know, go throughout time as they are able to, the hippopods. So they had to switch that around. So we do see, you know, these beautiful flashbacks and these dreamlike, you know, landscapes that really make you wonder throughout here. I thought she said she wasn't married, they make a big point of if she's pregnant or not, you know, and we find out at the end of the film that she chose to have her daughter, knowing her daughter was going to die of this cancer, is what she dies of in the films. It's hinted, or at least not hinted, but, you know, it's implied. So it's the idea that, you know, and that's why you have Jason, the fuck is his name now? Fucking Hawkeye.
Jeremy Renner.
I'm gonna cut that. We have Jeremy Renner's character, you know, who that's the father, and right here, Jeremy Renner's character, the father, you know, he thinks that she made the wrong choice because she chose to have the child that was going to die, you know, of cancer. But it's the choice to live and love than not love at all, and it's the
natural order of it, really.
Yeah, but knowing it, my point is they hold that to the end and it's delivered to you. So it's not just, oh, this is how this whole language works and ties in. It's like this beautiful sentiment that he gives you, like these little droplets of in these dream-esque sequences. And I'm gonna let you take it from here, because I also noticed that he always has these very mundane or just very day-to-day, like cities are, you know, locations when he's doing his establishing shots, but they're either like inside of them. There's like in Blade Runner, we have like the fantastical, right, with like all it's the grayscape, right? Everything looks gray when you're above it. Then you get down on the ground and you get like those pops of that neon blue. Same thing in Arrival. When you first look at it, it's like, you know, it's a very basic just camp, military camp with, you know, the huge pod there. But it's, if you look at it, it's got all this fog from like the mountain range that's surrounding it. Like, so again, it's like this drop of fantastical, you know, it's the contrast with the normal, you know, everyday day to life to the fantastical that he seems to always inject. And I don't know, you know, you're the one with the degree on that. So, I mean, I think these are choices that aren't, you know, it's easy to say I'm going to be different and do all this, but it's like I've seen a lot of student films. A lot of things don't work. So I think it's really like he pulls off a lot of like feats that I don't know if they get credit.
Well, with Arrival, for me, it's the color palette he uses in that film. You know, and he obviously collaborated with Bradford Young, who was, you know, obviously he took a break from Roger with Bradford, and what they did with the cinematography to convey lighting and shadows, which also complement the contrasts in color, can powerfully reflect on the story. I mean, you look at the film. If you look at the look of the film, is always very sanitized, and it evokes the atmosphere of a biohazard in them types of sequences, the ones that aren't, you know, flash forwards, that we, you know, obviously find out to be flash forwards. And this is expertly contrasted with the footage of Louise and her daughter in nature. you know, with more earthly colors. It creates a contrast between the hostility of the military base and the warmth of her vibrant coexistence with her daughter.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously that we find out hasn't happened. And that it's the way he uses stuff like that to really get you into not just the filmmaking he's presenting, but the story. And that's what it's all about. And I think what you were getting on, what you were coming to there, and I think we talked about this before, was how he constructs a foreign and unknown sensibility towards the Western audience who watch the film.
Mm-hmm.
And the ending very much, you know, links into that. This idea that we can come together as a species, and the hope for our future is there. I think, you know, where Interstellar is concerned with Nolan as his most hopeful film, Arrival is Denis' most hopeful film.
Yeah,
that's how I see it. It's the prominent theme of time, language, you know, suffering, separation, even, which we perceive as different in regards to the cultural landscape of Arrival. But the ending very much states that this shouldn't disconnect us.
Yes.
You know, with the global language that the heptapods give Louise, you know, which becomes a weapon of hope. And it's social tensions like this in all of his other films too that are heightened by the filmmaking. So
yeah, and he wanted, because what the process that's documented between him and Heiser, the you know, the screenwriter adapting the story, was, you know, they had philosophical discussions, you know, much like we know Nolan has done. So there's similarities in the methodology, I guess. I'm coming to that right now live. But anyways, you know, like, but he wanted to make sure the science led to emotion. And we get that with what I was talking about with the decision to have the daughter and have those moments, you know, even with the way she's able to think, and also like the division, like you said, and the idea that the way we think is dictated by the language. I find all that's just so fascinating. I think it's a beautiful film, and it is very sanitary until it's not. So again, it's really just being very consistent and then popping. Whether your consistency is vivid or dry, it really, you know, that's your choice to depict, obviously, what you're depicting, and then to throw in that contrast of color, that pop, or maybe it's, you know, not using colors like he's done in a film to sanitize. So I think that, you know, there's that saying as well that you get 3 different types of stories, especially in a adaptation. You get the first story, then adaptation, and then the story in the edit, which he is there for the whole thing as well, right? Because why do you think we're getting a Snyder cut? And that's considered a whole different movie. It's a different edit.
Yeah. I mean, it's perhaps the learning and the understanding of the heptapod language in Arrival, which is meant to symbolize a culture of education and understanding between the East and the West in a time where, you know, the divide has rarely been greater.
Yeah.
And that's really what I leave the film on. I leave on this idea of hope that we can work together regardless of our differences in culture and language. And you see that conflict throughout the film. You know, that perfect scene where Adam's character is looking at the all the footage of all the different leaders or the people at the different camps around the world, and they all just shut off when, you know, I can't remember the exact event in the
it's the domino effect.
They all just
yeah, because Forrest Whitaker speaks about the big domino is Chain, or the leader of China. I believe it actually is Chain. Let's face it, it does fit with the Western trope of, you know, East is going to kill West, you know, even though they are, it is Russia and China, for better or worse, but China's the one that she makes an agreement with and solves it. So whatever. But it's, you know, they see what happens when China goes offline, and then you see what happens when America goes offline. Australia looks up, and you just see all the Skypes going off essentially. And in the book as well, the aliens are never there. It's essentially they send down like Skype, like Zoom, like what we're doing right now. It's all conversation. Wow. Like, so the first thing they did, he's like, we get him at our door. We need him here. You know, like in the film, like it can't just be a bunch of Skype conversations. That's they send down, like what Luis goes up into the ship in, essentially what they send down in the books, but with it like a screen. But anyways, so now Blade Runner 2049, I have seen now twice. Contrary to popular belief, I wasn't a huge. I was always a fan of the original Blade Runner, but you know, Westworld was kind of like the exception for me, even though I'm getting more into that type of storytelling.
Yeah.
So I'm not as obsessed with it as some of the people that watch my channel would tend to believe I am. So I wasn't as committed to it, and I'm going to set this up because you're going to talk about Dune as well. Primarily Dune. I am going to say nothing about it because I am not informed about it. But Blade Runner was a risk for him, right?
Oh, it was a big risk. I mean, making a sequel to what a lot of people consider one of the most, influential science fiction films, and I know some people are very mixed on it too. But there was a huge audience there from the old film. It was really a difficult process, I think, for Villeneuve to making this pay off, and I think we saw that with the box office of the film. It was really, as he transitioned into that huge budget with Blade Runner, I mean, the box office performance of it has now really put a lot of hesitation on Dune. I think there's a lot bigger audience there when it comes to the book and the people who are into the source material. But Blade Runner definitely was a huge gamble. But in regards to the film as a story, I mean, I look at the film, regardless of its box office performance, as a fantastic piece of, cinema. To make a sequel that felt in line with the questions of what is human, but then taking it forward in a way that we see the next evolution, the next step, of a child that is now potentially a hybrid of a human and a replicant. To take it forward in that way and create a mystery surrounding that plot point is, I didn't expect it, but I thought it was really welcomed. And I think when it comes to the story of Blade Runner, the questions of memory, the problems the replicants face is, essentially is that they don't have memories of the past, which makes them emotionally inexperienced, and they end up reacting weirdly in certain situations in the film. But then on the other side, you've got the Tyrell Corporation, who create a copy of her as an experiment to see if they can make a more balanced replicant. She has fake memories implanted during that scene with Harrison Ford, which cushion her responses to things and make her act relatively normal. So the question is, do her fake memories make her more human? And it's questions like this, including morality, society, class, and even technology and modernization, which fit brilliantly into the filmography of Villeneuve, across his career. He's always approaching new themes in his films, and that's the kind of step he took with Blade Runner. As we said at the start of this episode, he restricts all of these, themes and questions through the viewpoint of the main character. And it makes the landscape of his film so much more mysterious and relatable, whether it's a fiction or non-fiction, in my eyes. That's how I see it.
And I also think it comes down to, because he has, stated that he only uses one camera. You always get that omniscient view, because we're watching what's happening to the character, and we're wondering just as much as they are what's happening. We're watching them wander. We're watching them in these empty rooms, as he likes to do. Blade Runner, I enjoyed it. It asks what makes you human, what is real. It's got a little bit of an ideological aspect of it, meaning like the types of societies in which we live in, and so forth. I think the ambiguity at the end is powerful, and it doesn't. I think the issue was the hang up on that ambiguity, meaning should there be now a sequel? The mistake for that, setting up another thread other than the power and the ambiguity, which I see it could work, but I don't really want another Blade Runner, and I don't have an issue with the ending. But I think that this is we see him really work in a lot of what he probably honed in on with Arrival in Blade Runner, right? You see a lot of similar set pieces and scenes, even though it's a very different type of story. But again, the emotional base to it, he uses all these bigger scientific and technological issues to touch on the emotional base of it. And this is the first film in which Joanne Johansson, who passed, is not with him, who was his primary score. Why can't I think of the fucking name for who makes a score?
Hans Zimmer.
Composer. Yeah, no, I know it's yeah, but he was with Joanne Johansson as a composer for many years before this. Joanne passes, Hans comes in, which it seems like a very similar vibe Obviously, Hans was inspired, by Johansson, or vice versa. But I like the way in which Blade Runner really goes out of its way, like to do what Villeneuve has done, even in Enemy and all that. With you have Jake Gyllenhaal playing two parts, so the contrast and the lighting is always slightly off, for each, so you can distinguish with them. And then he takes it to this whole new level in Blade Runner. And it's just these huge, it's all this gray landscape and then all this blue neon pop that comes out of nowhere, this fantastical aspect to it that I just thought really showed it showed a lot of courage. And I think he was a fan because he spoke about it. He said that if he ruined it, he'd never forgive himself and nobody else would either. And he'd understand. So it's important for him to be passionate. Now, transferring that over to Dune, your latest, that and Tenet have been your primary focus on your lovely channel, which I'm loving. That is quite the mountain to climb as well, my friend. What do you see? Break it down for me. Because it's not a consensus on people being happy about this movie even happening or him doing it.
Well, sure. I mean, with Dune, you've got two types of audience coming into this film. You're going to get the book readers, or maybe even three types of audience. You want book readers who want full faithfulness to the novel, which Denny has come out and said that he's going to be very faithful, but try and do it his way, but in a way that does reflect what happened in the book. You've then got people on the other side of that coin who are open to some new changes, but have also read the book. And then you've got people on the other side who are general film-going audiences. Mm-hmm. And he needs to find a way to get all of these people together. And Dune is going to be an extremely difficult book to adapt. I mean, I've been reading the first 2/3 of this book over the last month or so. I'm still coming to the final book in the first novel because it's split into, 3 different books. But what I've read so far, the intelligence that Frank Herbert had crafting that novel, there's details towards the ornithopters, the ships in the book, and the way shields are used, how water is you have to maintain water through still suits that they wear. They only travel by night and not by rest by day. And that's just touching the surface of some of the stuff that they cover in this book. But really what I see at the story, the central point of story of Dune is, I hesitant to say the phrase coming of age story, but it's how the youth rise up to what their parents and their ancestors have left for them. And they have to now take that mantle forward. And what do they become? And Paul Atreides is at the heart of that. He's the main character played by Timothée Chalamet. It obviously coming up in the new adaptation. But how is Villeneuve going to take this story that is so intricate, so detailed, focused around these big themes of nature and warfare and just so much? It expands everything. It's Star Wars, but took to another level. And don't forget, this very much inspired Star Wars. It inspired Lord of the Rings and a lot of these big films. How is he going to, as a visual storyteller, as we've been discussing, as he uses color palettes, mood, cinematography, score, to really capture this? I mean, one of the difficult parts of this novel that has stuck out for me since reading it is the internal monologue that the characters give in the book. They're very much they're discussing their thoughts, but the other characters don't know that. You're hearing their thoughts in the novel, but how is he going to capture all of this important information in internal dialogue in the film? And that's what I'm looking forward to see, because as a visual storyteller who only uses the right amount of dialogue in his films, he doesn't overdo it. How is he going to capture that? And it's just small things like that I'm very intrigued to see how he tackles.
I think that people do underestimate the issues that come along with adapting a novel such as, you speak of Frank Herbert's Dune, where you have all this, not just internal monologues, but what you're telling me is plot points that are conveyed during this. So that is, you have to visually convey emotion. So like, Song of Ice and Fire, I hate to always have to go back to that, but it's, a pretty good example. And people, the books are always so much, the books are always going to be more descriptive. You have a better idea. Like, like visuals are better for certain types of storytelling, internal monologues, you're kind of stuck. You got to figure out if somebody is thinking about their sore from climbing the walls of Winterfell, are you going to spend 2 minutes, having the guy rub his arms? Are you gonna, what I mean? But you're dealing with plot points. Eric Roth is one of the main screenwriters on this, and Villeneuve is credited as a screenwriter on Dune as well, and one more person. But Roth is known for Forrest Gump, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Insider, Munich. He's worked on The Alienist, House of Cards, and Berlin Station as of late. But what we're seeing is definitely, like you're voicing, high concept is what this needs to be, because it's a big studio film. So they need to catch people. You make money when you start getting outside of the base, outside of the pre-established base.
This is the big question. This is the big question around Dune that a lot of people have had towards its rating, because a lot of the things in Dune aren't adult by nature, but you can adapt it in a way that fits a 12A based on what I've read so far. I don't see this being a 15, especially with the performance of Blade Runner and Dune as a novel that they're very much, they don't know how it's going to do at this point. They haven't even started the marketing yet, apart from a few images.
Which highly it's very polarized. And the one thing I did want to add from Arrival, it's my breadbasket for Villeneuve, sorry, I just really love the film, is that he did take, there's a sequence in that film in which Jeremy Renner's character is doing a voiceover about what they've been accomplishing and what Luis has accomplished, and that was Villeneuve's choice in this adaptation, because he didn't like, because there was, so he chose to do something that's usually considered weak storytelling, but for pacing reasons it really works, because it just needed to get injected.
If you're going into Dune expecting faithfulness on every level, to the dialogue, to how the scenes are positioned and stuff, don't expect that. You need to go in with an open mind. A lot of people have read and seen the story of Dune. Now Denis is aiming to be faithful to that, but adapt it in a original way, to do stuff that is in his connection to his filmmaking. And it's not, otherwise he's going to be making a film that he's not comfortable with. And he's a fan of the novel himself, so...
I think that what it comes down to is it shows that he can pull the trigger to do the subversion, but also to, like I was speaking about at the very beginning, to tie it back, the convention as well, meaning just, the voiceover with Jeremy Renner saying because they had it in the film. They figured out how to adapt it from the book. That was done. It was in the film, like all these little analogies and situations in which Luis was proving that they could, it's the right hand and the left hand writing at the same time reference. They talk about what Australia is doing, blah, blah. All that was actually in the film. And he said, no, that's not good for the film, meaning its pacing it's getting slow, it's dragging along. I'm going to do something that isn't something people would brag about. So what I did is I put exposition over a voiceover when there's no other instance of that in the film, but it works, and it's brave, I think, and it's smart, because do things that work. Do things, don't worry about what people are going to say. Do things that work, because they've already adapted the book. They've already got the shots filmed in the can. This is the story in the edit. They snapped it back, and they did something that, you would never hear. So what I thought I would do is put exposition over it, because that's usually a sign of weak writing. But it's not. It's a sign of knowing, having at least, like you said, a feel for a movie, and knowing what it works and what doesn't. And sometimes it isn't fancy. Sometimes it's, whatever, salt of the earth type of deal.
Whatever's right to convey the scene and the meaning of what's happening in the scene, and the importance it has on the overarching narrative. That's what you do. And I think what you were mentioning about I think you were saying about symbolism a bit ago. Yeah. Enemy is a good film to look at if you want to, get an idea of how he's going to do some of these scenes in Dune. And in particular, I'm talking about not necessarily the visual symbolism, as if you've seen the film, you'll know about the whole spider thing at the end, as Gyllenhaal's doppelganger, his wife, wife turns into a massive spider, and it's more of a symbolism towards that story and how he's now moved on from being just a boyfriend who doesn't know what he wants in life to, you know, being with this. He's now a husband essentially by the end of the film. But it's not necessarily the visual look at that. It gets inside your head. Enemy is a film that really does. It's cinematography. There's a lot more close-ups in that film. Like you say, it still pulls back the camera a bit more, but there are a lot more close-ups, and he focuses on getting inside the head of Jake Gyllenhaal's character. I think a lot more than all the other protagonists that he's tackled. And I can't wait to see what he does with June, in particular Paul, because Paul is in the novel is very much a he's the Luke Skywalker, Jon Snow, but more intelligent. That's how I see him from what I've read so far.
Luke Skywalker and John are both pretty stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just more intelligent.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just thought of that. I was like, I mean, I knew that independently, but I've just booked them together. Yeah, pretty stupid put together still. Might even, not the best.
In the novel, Paul Atreides he sees things before, like 200 pages before they happen. And even he doesn't know, but as we go through the book, he starts to put things together, and then it happens, and it's like, Villeneuve is a perfect filmmaker to do that. The way he can play with time, and I think Arrival, what you were mentioning about the flash forwards in Arrival, which we think are flashbacks, is perfect to try and show that kind of technique in Dune. Maybe he'll approach it that way. But yeah, there's small hurdles that he may have to get over with the way the story's told and everything. But I have full confidence in Villeneuve, because over the last 5 or 6 films, he's continuously adapting his style to the story he's telling, and he does it in a way that's so prominent, striking. And I have no questions surrounding what he'll do. I just can't wait to see the film now.
Yeah, I think that Villeneuve, because you were the one that suggested we did, did this focus on him, and I'm so happy you did, because Arrival has always been, since 2016, but it's really been like a really like standout, because I like to do my pseudo intellectual writing and write a few screenplays here and there, and so the adaptation of the short story was something that really interested me from the get-go. And I never paid attention to Denis. I wasn't looking at the director, and now that we're going into a lot of these directors, the auteurs, and we see, it's like, when you think about it, how many directors' names do you know versus screenwriters? In a lot of directors, it's not like Villeneuve's not a screenwriter either, guy. We're not. I'm going to have up on screen when this video is actually made of the projects he's done. But by no means has his most, at least critically awarded and received, base of work, his writing. It's his directing, and he really is a great example. Just doing research for this, looking at how he plays with the rules of thirds, stuff that is very simple. If you have Instagram, you know what it is. Like the way in which he frames his shots, the way in which he plays with ambiguity, the way with his color palette, the tone of his films, the way in which he scores the films to have the music it actually like intercede with the sounds of the world. So you start to wonder, is this in the film?
What I was just going to point out about the score. I mean, you look at Arrival, your favorite film, with Johan's score. All the musical notes of his score appear to tonally mimic the indecipherable spoken language of the heptapods, and it portrays a foreign and discomforting feel as the images of the alien vessels hover over the Earth, and it's stuff like that just fully transports the audience into that, and they get into the mindset of what that location would feel like.
Yeah,
what the events that are happening there with the language unfolding, it really gets it, it transfers it across to the audience, and I just love that.
And I absolutely love it. And I had a live stream, The Power of the Score, where I had a composer come on, and we switched around just to show one aspect of filmmaking, and we switched the score in some scenes, because he made some originals to change the tone of it, just to show the contrast, to show like how much the music. So imagine, as a director, you have to go and you're the one that says yes to this or that. You're the one that goes out and finds the cinematographer that's going to be able to achieve what you have in your mind. You get the composer that's going to be able to work with you and achieve. You get the editor, you sit in on the edit, you know what I mean? And you have but that's why you have the Snyder cut, like we said, and stuff like that, you know, very different. These films can be changed drastically just by the shade of light, you know, much less music is so pivotal. One thing about Peaky Blinders I really like is how they have Birmingham, and they have the sounds of that city like are so like intrinsic.
You can hear them, always hear them, and it's in the back of your mind, and that's what makes you feel like you're in that location, you're in that world that the director has created, and then it helps you immerse in the narrative even further. And I think Denis, as we were saying right at the start of this, his collaboration and his trust and being comfortable with, you know, his knowledge on all of them different roles of a production and how he can help or say something that will allow the composer or the cinematographer to adapt to what he wants and what, you know, ultimately they're trying to capture. It really helps bring the whole thing together, and that's something that I guess distinguishes a filmmaker or a director from a writer. You know, they've got their hands in all these different boxes, and they have to be ready to adapt to that situation.
Respect the medium it's something I always stress. I feel like people do not respect like what goes. It's not better. It's just like stage acting. It's not better than film. It is different.
No, it's just a different medium. Yeah.
And if you look, I mean, look at Decker and Kay's fight with Elvis in the background going on it. I mean, that's a perfect example in Blade Runner of playing with the score. I mean, the score is dictating literally what happens. Obviously, you know, it's the music at the Vegas club, but yeah, I think that he is, you know, just he's brave in a lot of ways. Like I said, when we're capping it off here, I truly believe that. And I say it because, you know, the simple things, choosing to do the voiceover in a montage scene, which, you know, conventionally, usually you're like, well, that's usually a sign of weak writing. Not the case in this. He knows when to do it. Flipping the shot so they're upside down when they enter the alien craft. They have had the world flipped on their heads, right? It's been turned upside down. He turns the scene upside down. Get what I mean? Like, he has these simplistic ways in which he achieves these very layered and complex ideas in sentiment. Yeah. And I think that that's smart, right? It's not always, I think it's always people looking to do things so technically advanced or so complex. Like, you know, a smart, very talented artist can convey something simply that is very complex, you know, just like somebody that can really know about any topic can convey it simply because they know about it. So I think it's being able to have faith in yourself and to be able to take those chances.
But he's improved over his career. I mean, he's not necessarily, if you look at his first few films, you know, August, I forgot what the film was called.
August 32nd.
I did watch it a few years ago, but like, you look at some of these earlier films, and Maelstrom that he did, they're not necessarily like the best films in his filmography, but it's all the intentions there straight to begin with, in the way he chooses his themes and his storylines to approach and the way he films them. It's all there to begin with. And as he gets into the, you know, the enemy, the prisoners stage of things, and then moving on to Sicario and Arrival and Blade Runner, you start to really see him just really expand the tools of his tool set, you know. And I think the way he uses color has got, and lighting and, you know, shadows and score and the twist, everything he uses seems to get more skillful as he goes along. It seems to be more expanded and improved from the last film he did. Even if you have a favorite film, the filmmaking has always seemed to improve, and that's really one thing to look for when going into June, because this is going to be a film that, you know, based on what I've read and based on what I've heard towards the end of the novel, it's just huge in scale. But it's done on a very intimate level, very similar to Blade Runner in a way. The scale of the future of where humanity and the replicants are going through, obviously, Rachel and Deckard's child, that's huge in scale when it comes to story, because it's the future. Yeah. But the way he focuses on the protagonist, he focuses on what they want, what they're trying to achieve, the mystery and the intimate moments of his films. He finds a way to, you know, create an intimate nature to everything he does within this huge story. And that's what I've always appreciated about him. Arrival is a perfect example of that, actually, with, you know, the whole film basically takes place on, you know, a mountaintop. But the scale of it and what you see happen in the film and what happens to Amy Adams and when she finds out about her daughter, that, you know, that's huge in scale in what what can happen. The idea of having a language to that everyone can communicate and understand with, going into the future is really big in scale but intimate in character and how it's shown, how it's visually presented.
Yeah, he's able to ground it in primitive, primal emotion, which is what's always important. You can write about humans in the future. You can write about lion people in the future that become a race. Give them real emotions that we can relate to. Everybody, even if you're a father or not, you can relate to. Children, or having a dad, or having a family, are just not wanting to lose a loved one. Simple primal emotion is really the core. And when you look at the set pieces of, say, Arrival, it's not like it's a spectacle in a sense of what the actual gravity of the situation, but it's not
exactly
it's like it's like 3 set pieces in that film. It's like the trailer park, which is their like home, and then them going with the basic Ford pickup trucks or Rams, whatever, they're all like just some pickups, a bunch of silver pickups. They don't even have a lot of like military equipment, and then the hazmat suits up until the pod. I mean, it's not that it's not like grand in scale, but if Michael Bay made that movie, it would be crazy. And Michael Bay does Michael Bay the best.
It'd be a circus.
So it would be a circus. So yes, it would. No, absolutely. I can't thank you enough. And I'm looking forward to Dune because I am a person that doesn't have the joy of reading the books yet. And I don't have the burden of it. I don't have the burden. I don't have that burden.
It's good to go in blank. I mean, it depends who you are. I've said this to a lot of people on the channel who've asked me whether they should read the book before or after. I think if you're someone who can go into a film and appreciate it on its own merits without relating too much to what you've read, then that's fine. Or feel free to read the book. But if you're someone who, really wants to experience this on film for the first time and not know everything that happens, then obviously you'll want to do that. It really is up to personal choice.
Okay. So I can't thank you enough, John, for coming by, and of course you're going to be linked in the information below. Go check out John's channel. He has an excellent perspective. He actually has good information, and he's credentialed to speak about it, which is rare on this platform. So I can't thank you enough. We'll be seeing John in a few weeks again. We're gonna give you another heavy hitter for the Storyteller series, and hopefully this is going to be a little bit of a different format. So hopefully this one works out, and it keeps getting better, because I think it keeps getting better every week. So I'm always happy to have you here, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Thanks for getting me on again to talk about another filmmaker who's very different from the last one, but I think that's the beauty of following these different directors. They each have different elements of artism, different elements of commercial nature to them, and it really all comes down to story, and that's what we're focusing on, and how all of these little pieces of the puzzle can fit together to present a story. And Villeneuve is perfect for that. So thanks again for getting me on.
No, absolutely. And we hope that, if you guys take away anything from this, it's that if you didn't notice these little things, that's kind of a good thing. But if you're interested in them, it's, obviously it's a lot of fun to go in and look at the actual process of filmmaking and how these stories come to life, because there's so many different aspects of them. That's why it's not just they tell stories that are subverting tropes, or they tell stories, with just a different musical score than most, what I mean? You're going to get a lot of surface level stuff. We try to give you a little bit of insight into it without, trying to come from the proverbial ivory tower there. You over there in England, my friend.
Weathering the storm.
Yes. No. So thank you so much. Yep. And we will be on next week with W. Axel Foley in Kubrick, how Kubrick tells stories. So that's the genesis of a lot of
fantastic filmmaker there.
Yeah, right there. He inspired a lot. There you go. He inspired a lot of people. So I cannot wait. Make sure to subscribe if you want to support creativity. The Patreon is in the information below, and we will see you guys soon.